Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part, no it's not, it's the third part thereof. For the 21st of February 2025, and my goodness, there's an absolute ton of stuff to get through. So let's get to it. We are going to go from peace talks to Nazi salutes by Steve Bannon to threats of pulling the US forces out of Germany and everything in between. Okay, Russian propagandists have been ordered to push victory even over NATO narratives ahead of the invasion anniversary. Ukraine's defense intelligence has reported the Kremlin seeks to spread disinformation to weaken Ukrainian morale and destabilize the country and discredit Ukraine among its allies. So get ready for a flood of disinformation coming from Russia. Now, on Monday, Trump will host French President Macron, and then on Thursday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So it looks like Macron has leapfrogged over Starmer there to get into the White House. I don't know how much either of these are going to be able to change the narrative coming out of the Trump White House. I think he's insanely intransigent, Trump, although he does have a kind of recency bias. I think that he is going to see Europe as a threat now to the United States of America. I think he's switched sides, sees the alliance of the EU and even throw in the UK as well as on the side of Ukraine and not on the side of, I don't know, the US making a ton of money out of extorting Ukraine to bring about peace, an unjust and unsatisfactory peace. Shashank Joshi is here quoting for the Financial Times. Russia used the first round of talks in the US over Ukraine to demand the withdrawal of NATO forces from the alliance's eastern flank, triggering concern in Europe that the Trump administration could acquiesce to seal a peace deal. Romania's government has said. We're going to return to this actually because that's been added to by JD Vance as well. But it's interesting that Romanians are stating that. We're going to also return to Romania. Now, Russia could agree to use the $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. So Russia could agree to this being used in Europe by Europe for reconstruction in Ukraine, but will insist, so the rumor goes, that, and from Reuters anyway, that part of the money is spent on the 1/5 of the country that Moscow's forces control. So yeah, you can use our frozen Russian assets, but you have to rebuild Mariupol, Luhansk, Donetsk, all the areas that we have destroyed. You can use that to rebuild these areas, and we're going to stay in control of them. Interesting. Now, China has backed a US-Russia consensus on Ukraine war. This is really revealing, in my opinion, that China have come out and said, we're going to back what the US and Russia decide. They're going to back what benefits China and Russia. Russia secondarily, but China primarily. The fact that they are before any consensus being has been agreed upon by these two countries, it doesn't include Ukraine. They are agreeing to it. So I think that is fascinating, but tells us that they believe that the US really are going to be acting either on behalf of Ukraine or either on behalf of China or indeed Russia. That tells you so much. Beijing is prepared to play a constructive role in the political settlement of the crisis, Chinese Foreign Ministry said. We also heard Chinese Foreign Minister a few days back saying, you mentioned, can China stop buying gas from Russia? Well, I'd like to ask this. If China does not buy gas from Russia, which country can provide so much gas as to meet the needs of Chinese people? As a practical understanding of the issues concerning, say, secondary sanctions or sanctions on China because, hey, you need to stop buying gas from Russia. Yeah, well, we don't buy it from Russia. Where do we get it from? Because we need an absolute ton of gas, and gas isn't an easy thing to transport, particularly when you've got pipelines already set up, so on and so forth. Now, China have started live fire activities, training activities in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. This has caused a lot of consternation down under, And here, Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general, says there's been a gutless response from the Australian government on this issue. They appear to be totally out of their depth in a new geopolitical environment and unwilling to stand up to this Chinese messaging and coercion. The Chinese clearly have become emboldened by the West falling apart, with the US eating itself and changing sides. This is now going to be China's time. Are we going to see them strike for Taiwan? Are we going to see them muscle themselves around the Indo-Pacific region? Almost certainly. The US has just given up its position at the top of the hegemonic ladder, as far as I'm concerned. Unless there's some radical changes of approach, honestly, it's just insanity coming out of the US at the moment. Now, the EU seeks, this might be good news for the US, or at least from their point of view, the EU is seeking more US gas to replace Russian supplies. This could be a sweetener to the US to say, look, stay on course, US. We'll buy more LNG because we're going to have to, a bit like China. Where do we get the gas from if we're not getting it from Russia? LNG from the US. So the EU is looking to develop renewable energy faster to reduce its overall dependence on fuel, but says EU Commissioner Dan Jorgensen. So they're going to go renewables, I assume, plus nuclear, in order to wean themselves, rightfully so, not just from an environmental point of view, although I think that's deeply important. Climate change has been forgotten in light of this war, and now the US is claiming that climate change, so-called climate change, scare quotes, is a woke agenda. It's like, but from a security point of view, and they need that kind of diversification. You don't really want to be getting in LNG from the US, because then they have leverage over the EU, just as Russia has had previously with hydrocarbons. So, energy diversification and energy independence isn't just about the climate. It's actually largely about security. Right, Shashank Joshi saying, okay, what's happened? So JD Vance has floated a US troop withdrawal from Germany over free speech concern. So he's at CPAC, so the Conservative conference, where they're just being their typical wingnut selves. They're banging on about woke, whatever. I mean, seriously, guys, get over it. There's more important stuff to think about. Just honestly, shut up. But yet, this is their Project 2025 agenda. They're absolutely obsessed with this crap. And it's like, freedom of speech, Europe's terrible. If you don't sort that out, we're going to pull out our troops, for our NATO troops from Germany. Now, this is also to do, really, what this might well be, is actually regulation of Twitter. They're going to talk about free speech. But the EU wants to regulate Twitter and some of these other social media networks because they are that egregious at the moment in terms of what they're allowing. They're allowing manipulation from vast numbers of Russian bots and trolls. These bot and troll farms that supposedly, said someone the other day, 70% of European located Twitter accounts are now trolls and bots. So rightfully, the EU wants to do something about that. But because Elon Musk is funding the Republican Party and is at the center of the US government at the moment, making these huge swinging cuts, he said to his buddy JD Vance, who was himself funded by Peter Thiel, another South African tech oligarch, Elon Musk has said, you sort out the EU. I want you to make sure that the EU does not regulate Twitter. And so JD Vance runs off and does his bidding and announces that, Vance on Thursday night suggested that the Trump administration could reconsider its military presence in Germany, tying continued defense commitments to Berlin's stance on free speech, or Europe's stance on Twitter. Now, Shashank Joshi from The Economist, defense correspondent, says Article 5 is not worth much under these people. Act accordingly. This is a really big warning shot from JD Vance and from the US, to which people like Shashank Joshi, real serious analysts, go, it turns out that Article 5 of NATO means at the square root of feck all. It means nothing now that we've got these clowns in charge, JD Vance and Trump. So we need to act accordingly. And one day, says Joshi, and I'm totally along with this, one day the US is going to discover how difficult and expensive it is to project military power around the world without the benefit of enormous bases and logistical hubs in Germany. Like I've said before, those bases are there. The US has spent way more than Europe, not because charity, not because the EU have been, or Europe has been free riding and free loading. It's because it's been in the US's strategic interest and the European strategic interest. I wrote a big piece on this in a back channel group I'm on today, I'm saying I said I'm tired of the European countries getting the blame for not spending enough on defense. There are nations that do not spend enough still, right? And so we can have a look at some nations, but the whole principle of blame is just gives ammunition for those presently in the US to beat Europe over the head with it and leverage. Don't accept the blame game. The blame is irresponsible because it was in the US's strategic interest and the European strategic interest that the US spent a ton on defense and Europe didn't. Europe was reconstructing the infrastructure in Europe post-war, and then it was a Cold War, and the US was fighting predominantly at the head of this coalition, fighting an ideological war against the USSR and communism. And so they wanted to project their power around the world, predominantly in Europe, to stop Europe coming under the influence of the expanding USSR. So Eastern Europe was the battlefront there. So the US spent an absolute ton of money putting their bases in Europe because it was in their interest so to do. Right? Not because like, oh, let's be charitable to Europe. Oh, and then like 40 years later saying, why aren't you guys spending enough on defense? Well, we weren't spending as much on defense as you guys because you were on some kind of massive ideological project and war against the USSR. We were along with you on that, and we formed NATO, and we're part of that broadly, most of us. But we had other things to focus on as well, such as our welfare states. Why weren't you spending enough on your welfare state? Okay, so we can have that. But this whole kind of blame, my understanding is the US spent more because it was in their interest to do so. Europe spent less because it was in their interest to do so. And now things have changed. The US has become populist and isolationist and has been growing, has been wanting to recede more and more from European affairs for some time. So Obama said in 2014, let's have everyone agreeing to spend 2% of GDP on defense because some of you guys are not spending enough. And that was the start of the realignment, which was a wider geopolitical move for the US to try and get Europe to take more responsibility for the situation that has now matured. But now what's happened is Trump and his team are saying, well, you guys don't pay enough, blah, 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 not understanding the whole history of why Europe is not paid. And yes, there are some nations that really need to have paid more as well. But in general, we are where we're at. Let's stop blaming people. Let's just get on and have Europe pay more. And the US, if you are just really going to bugger off, just bugger off. Like, just go. Stop all this kind of blame game and attacking Europe and being like this. And by the way, one day you're going to call on Article 5, right? Like you did. You're the only nation to have done so in after 9/11. We came to your help. Germans, Danish, British, we came to your help, right? We helped you out. Canadians. One day you're going to call on it again. If you keep doing this, right, NATO won't exist and you won't have us to call on. And you'll be on your own, mate. So stop it. And what really annoys me is this idea that free speech has been attacked in Berlin when the US sits lower than most European nations on the Freedom of Press Index. And then, I talked to you about Robert Garcia calling Elon Musk a dick in public. And then, is it Brianna Keller on CNN said, do you think that's really responsible? And he went, well, he is a dick. Right. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So if you're going to come to me as a Republican, right, or as a MAGA Republican and be genuinely annoyed about free speech, then what the hell are you doing about this? So now he has received a letter from the United States Department of Justice. As United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, I receive requests for information and clarification. I take these requests seriously, blah, 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 blah. During a live interview, blah, 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 blah. We take threats against public officials as if that's a threat. So he has now been sent this letter. You can go and read that letter now by the Department of Justice for doing that. That is an attack on free speech. Now you can say, well, is it responsible for a politician to be using that language? Blah, 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 blah. But a letter from the Department of Justice about that? Wow, given what we have heard from MAGA Republicans over the last 4 years plus. So, do not lecture on free speech if you are coming from the present ruling party in the US. Okay, JR sent this, which is the Dutch have arrested a 57-year-old man for illegally exporting motherboards and GPUs to Russia via Hong Kong, and the UAE and Cyprus, violating sanctions with sales worth $24 million. That's absolutely incredible, but well done for getting him. Now, unfortunately, in the Netherlands, the funder landscape for NGOs, non-governmental organizations, is under pressure internationally, not only because of the USAID funding cuts, but developments in the Netherlands as well here. So a devastating blow to many NGOs in the Netherlands. The Dutch government has announced it will stop funding all projects related to women's rights, gender equality, vocational and higher education, sports and culture. Significant cuts will also be made to support for climate initiatives, civil society and multilateral cooperation. In other words, they've gone MAGA. Quote, all development programs we fund must directly contribute to our own interests, says the minister for the far-right party PVV. So this is Geert Wilders, total MAGA. While emergency humanitarian assistance will fortunately continue, the plan fails to see the development programs are in the interests of the more just, stable and thriving world, which benefits us all. Now more than ever, if you or our company have the means, please continue your support, says this particular person. So, Dutch person. Now, yeah, that is PVV going down the MAGA road, and it is not cool. Now, going on to Romania. Derek Tanis, who's a Romanian source, says about peace, quote, the frontiers are changing, so what are we to do? We have territories we need from Ukraine. There's northern Bukovina, there's the Bugiak, there's also some bits of Maramuras and Transcarpathia. Ukraine is an invented state that will disappear. Who's saying that? Călin Georgescu, who is running for president of Romania. Romania is the keeper of an ancient cosmic secret of humanity. Romania is the energetic center of planet Earth. Romania will become the global leader of the future worldwide spiritual revolution. Romania is destined to lead humanity. Okay, so this guy's nuts, but he's also making claims to taking territory within Ukraine. So here's the guy that Musk is working to install into the Romanian presidency. Openly says Romania will invade Ukraine. Adrian P., who's a Romanian source, says the effing American regime is trying to force a coup in Romania to install a pro-Russian stooge who doesn't believe in the moon landing. Seriously, Americans still sleeping? Stop MAGA or become the villains of the world with them. So you've got Elon Musk putting support in for Georgescu. You've got loads of people now attacking Romania, and because of the disinformation that's been spread by the MAGA administration about the cancellation of the presidential elections there. And then you've had pressure to release the Tate brothers, who are arrested in Romania on sex trafficking charges and can't leave, or they're under investigation. Financial Times, I mean, it's all bad. But anyway, also concerning Romania, Russia has used the first round of talks with the US over ending the war in Ukraine to demand the withdrawal of NATO forces from the alliance's eastern flank, according to the Financial Times. So Russia asked the US for NATO withdrawal from Eastern Europe, says Romania. So Romania are now saying, yep, the Russians have asked the US to withdraw their troops. So now you're hearing JD Vance threaten to withdraw troops over free speech ideas, and this is what Russia has asked them to do. Romania has claimed this, and the US appear to be wanting to fulfill the demands of Russia. The US on Russia's side. It is just obvious now. US delegation had rejected Moscow's demand, but there are no guarantees the US would not eventually make this concession to Putin, and we are hearing JD Vance threaten that concession to Germany over free speech, regulation, issues, etc., etc. It is unconscionable what the United States is presently doing. Now, this all says, Elon Musk said, you're losing credibility with this. Either Zelensky holds an election to prove that he represents the will of the people, or he is a dictator. So Elon Musk is going full on attack Zelensky, although he did defend the Ukrainians over one claim to do with the missing money, and he did a bit of correct fact checking there of Trump's position, Elon Musk. But as I said, don't get too drawn in by that, because he spent the last forever long, and still is, slagging off Zelensky. So it feels like a line has been crossed here. This can no longer be written off as simply the unhinged ramblings of an eccentric billionaire. This is outright malicious. Musk is now part of the US government, and he's actively undermining a friendly nation fighting an existential war. So he is in charge of Doge. Donald Trump admitted that publicly, even though in a court case, Elon Musk has denied he's in charge of Doge. And then Trump goes and dobs him in. But Elon Musk is an official part of the government, whether you want to admit it or not. Like, he is saying things and getting involved with AfD, with Romanian politics. He is crossing all sorts of lines, and he's attacking Zelensky. This is not just the ramblings of an eccentric billionaire. This is outright malicious. And remember where he came from. This is what Elon Musk said in March 2022. Hold strong, Ukraine. 6 Ukrainian flags. And see where he's at now. It's absolutely incredible. Interestingly, though, a new poll has found that Americans view Trump as a dictator more than they do Zelensky, as I reported earlier in my hits and losses in the other section. So that's interesting that, you know, there's more support for Zelensky, indeed, inside the US than for Trump. There's more support inside Ukraine for Zelensky than Trump has inside the US. So it's really, it's beyond the pale, I think, for Trump to accuse Zelensky of X, Y, and Z when, you know, he's just projecting. He's the one that's a dictator. He's the one that's not popular. In fact, his ratings have been tanking at the moment. They've been going really down. CNN did a piece on that just recently. And that's across 4 different pollsters as well. It's not just one poll. 4 pollsters are showing that actually this is really hurting Trump, that his ratings are tanking. Now, GB News. I mean, I hate GB News. This is Tom Tugendhat, who's a former military man, a Conservative MP who ran for leadership of the Conservative Party. He didn't get it. It's now Kemi Badenoch, but he ran for it, as he did previously, I think, as well. This is GB News that started as and continues as a Fox News equivalent. And this is absolutely despicable from GB News, and they should be lambasted for this.
What do you think Vladimir Putin, went into that special military operation in 2022 for in the east of Ukraine?
So it's only the Russians who call it a special military operation. Everybody else calls it what it is.
No, it's not actually. It's not actually. Some of Trump's government will now also call it a special military operation, because they will say if he deliberately wanted to go in and take over Ukraine, he wouldn't have sent in so few troops. If he wanted ambition to take over the whole of Ukraine, he could have done that. And he didn't do that. He was trying to force a negotiation to the table, surely.
No, that's not true, Bev. That is completely rewriting history.
It isn't.
He sent shock troops. No, Bev, come on, let's look at the facts, right? He sent shock troops into the airport just outside Kiev, thinking it would be a really easy run. He thought that his armored columns would get through all the way to Kiev, coming from Belarus. It was completely clear. What we discovered was that his army is so corrupt that it simply cannot manage the fuel and logistics to keep an armoured column going for 100 kilometres. Now, that's not because he designed it so. It's because he is an appalling dictator and everybody lies to him at every level.
So, there's a distinction to be made here, because I would maintain that Putin started that as a special military operation, and then within 3 days it became a war. But for her to not call it now a war, and to maintain it's a special military operation, and say, well, actually, some people in the MAGA American crowd call it that. Well, yeah, because they're completely compromised by the Russians, you fucking idiot. So that is disgusting from her. Bev Turner can take a long walk off a short pier, as far as I am concerned. And I'm glad Tom Tugendhat went to town there in dispelling that. So Bill Browder said, this is unbelievable. The anchorwoman on GB News is now referring to Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a special military operation, just like Russian state television. What is happening? That's disgusting. Now, the reformer line GB News is doing that. And now Farage himself from Reform is out in at the CPAC, the Conservative Conference in America, because that's really doing wonders for his own constituency of Clacton. I'm sure they want him to be out there schmoozing with Trump rather than sorting out the frickin' potholes in Clacton. But of course, you know, the Reform UK leader isn't really a local MP, let's face it. Reform leader Nigel Farage, speaking from the MAGA conference in America, told Sky News not to take Trump literally. I'm not going to play you this clip, but the takeaway point is he said, and I've said this before, he said, don't take Trump literally. Well, when Trump is saying Zelensky has a 4% approval rating and he's a dictator, like, how should we take that? Like, oh, don't take him literally. He really meant 57% or 63% or 52%. Well, why didn't he say that? So how do we take it? Like, how does he's got 4% approval rating? How do we understand that metaphorically? How do we understand Zelensky's a dictator metaphorically? Because if you don't mean he's literally a dictator, then I don't understand what you're saying. Or it's just an insult, in which case Trump is still just insulting Zelensky. So Farage can jog on for being an absolute donut, right? That makes no sense. And it is trying to get your mate Trump off the hook for being himself unbelievably supportive of Putin and unbelievably critical of Zelensky and Ukraine and all of the US's allies. But because Nigel Farage is smoozing around CPAC, he can't, of course, criticise Donald Trump, even though, my goodness, there's justification for such criticism. Now, the UK and Norway have been discussing a new Arctic Defence Pact over the Russian threat. The UK is determined to play a leadership role on European security and showing our adversaries that we are united in our determination to protect our interests, said UK Defence Secretary John Healey. I like John Healey. Speaking to my mates at the pub last night, and my mate Dave was saying, isn't it interesting, the meeting with Norway, is that anything other than we're just maritime neighbours? Or do you think that there's, because Norway are not fully in the EU, this is UK and Norway doing some interesting alliance building that is signalling that UK want to be part of the EU but aren't part of the EU? And, you know, I don't know. You can read it in lots of ways. I was like, I think it's probably just the geography of it, really, realistically. But that's an interesting idea that, you know, Norway, it has this relationship with the EU, which, you know, Theresa May shot us, I think, in the foot by ruling out a hybrid Brexit. So we could have gone out of the EU, and it was like, Brexit means Brexit. We're going to do full-on hard leave. So then we're left out of the EU completely on our own, trying to do these trade deals and then getting screwed over in these trade deals, even with like Japan and Australia and New Zealand. We did trade deals, which the people who did the deals admitted were terrible. Like, literally, the Brexiteers who did the deal, the Australia deal, later came out and said, yeah, it was a terrible deal. Like, oh yeah, thanks for that. So we would have been better to have done a hybrid deal like Norway, where, you know, there isn't free movement of people, blah, blah, blah. And you got the kind of, you have some of the benefits of Europe, but you don't get to vote on. So, you know, that many people would argue would have been in our economic interests to have done that. So Norway has this interesting relationship with Europe, and we have a fairly close relationship with Norway, I guess, or at least they're our neighbours, but, you know, maybe we're forging a closer relationship with them as a way of getting a little bit closer to Europe without officially getting closer to Europe. I don't know. Interesting here, there are new polling results out. So do you think it's more important for the UK government to support Ukraine or to maintain good relations with the US? 48% said Ukraine, 20% said the US. Wow. 14% neither, 18% don't know. But that is 2.5 times more people want to support Ukraine than the US. I agree. Myself, I find that absolutely fascinating. It's just a poll, but take it with a pinch of salt. Now, David From here says, can we also keep in mind that while Zelensky, like Churchill in 1940 to 45, postponed elections, Trump in peacetime tried to overturn by violence an election he lost and has since pardoned all the co-conspirators in his attempted coup. All these parallels, these accusations that Zelensky is a dictator and he outlawed these political parties in Ukraine. I saw this one MAGA person, I can't remember who it was, quite a famous person, just listing all the things that they said pointed towards Zelensky being a dictator. Outlawing these parties. It's like, yeah, Churchill didn't have an election for 9 years and outlawed pro-Nazi parties in the UK. Did exactly the same thing. No one called, all of these things you listed for Zelensky, Churchill did them. No one calls Churchill a dictator. No one's called him a dictator. So, sort it out. Meanwhile, Trump has tried to overturn by violence an election that he lost and pardoned all the co-conspirators in that attempted coup. So you tell me who's moving towards dictatorship. And actually, we'll come back to that idea. British Foreign Minister David Lammy has said no, that he saw no appetite from Russia for peace with Ukraine after listening to his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov talk at a closed-door meeting at the top G20 of the top G20 diplomats in South Africa recently. So this idea that the US are capitulating to Russia is even more problematic when you understand that Russia aren't, it appears, remotely interested in peace. They still have their maximalist agenda in store. Right, okay. Now we're going to move on to America more formally. So Zelensky's met with Keith Kellogg, the envoy for Ukraine, and that has restored hope, said Zelensky, which is kind of quite insightful because it means that actually Zelensky had lost hope with what's been going on in Riyadh and with Trump attacking Zelensky formally and JD Vance being an absolute wingnut. Quote, a meeting that restores hope, and we need strong agreements with America. Agreements that will really work, said Zelensky after meeting with Keith Kellogg. We'd come back, we're going to go talk about it a little bit more and then come back to this. So a US Special Envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, called Zelensky, quote, brave and courageous leader of our nation at war. So that's interesting. That's directly against what Trump has said, and reported a, quote, long and productive day with Ukraine's leadership. He mentioned, quote, extensive and positive discussions with the president and his, quote, talented national security team. So this is Keith Kellogg being very, he's praising Zelensky and his team an awful lot here, trying to rebuild some of those very damaged bridges. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. Now, I think a lot of this, and Keith Kellogg as well, I think a lot of that conversation will have been about natural resources and Ukraine doing this deal, this extortion deal with the US. More in a second, though. So we have heard from a European diplomat that Americans keep saying different things. Different Americans say different things at these meetings. And also the same Americans say different things in different meetings. And there's just chaos in what the actual ideology, what the policy is coming from the United States administration. The Kyiv Independent reports that the US promises Europe to maintain Russian sanctions at least until the Ukraine peace deal, according to Bloomberg. So US Secretary of State Rubio assured a group of European colleagues that sanctions would not be lifted earlier in a phone call on the 18th. However, since then, there have been lots of threats to lift the sanctions. So again, just not sure what's going on. He said, this is Rubio, said after the meeting with Russian negotiators, saying the US talks with Moscow are only a first step and not a shift in policy, as people have been worried that the US has swapped sides. He's been trying to allay the fears. European officials remain uncertain about the US apparent pivot towards Russia, however. Now, Politico have reported that Trump plans to withdraw the US from the UN Human Rights Council and end the UNRWA funding, which has been controversial. Lots of people saying it's funding Hamas things and whatnot, before meeting Netanyahu. These moves, reviving his first-term policy, are driven by claims of the council's anti-Israel bias. Okay, that's kind of expected. I was expecting that. However, it gets worse. Republicans in the US have launched efforts to withdraw Washington from the UN amid concerns that the international organization is not advancing American interests, according to Fox News. The proposed bill, which I doubt would get through, but it calls for a complete US withdrawal from the UN, including cutting off funding for the organization and its agencies and banning participation in peacekeeping missions. Wow. This is what the US is doing now. They're executive orders to get out of the WHO, Paris Accord, UN human rights, NATO even, it wouldn't surprise, it's all looking bad. And then there was this statement in the UN that we heard yesterday that the US weren't going to sign, that is condemning the invasion of Ukraine, sorry. The US has not yet decided, apparently, whether it will support the annual UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, says John Kelly, the political coordinator of the US mission to the UN. Quote, "We need to see what instructions we get from Washington." In other words, we're waiting to be told what to do. But since that they have said to the G7 that they want to take out the idea that Russia is the aggressor in the war, which is insane, that the US is saying that the Russians aren't the aggressor anymore, that is likely that they will want to change. Or I can imagine they won't sign up to that resolution. I bloody hope they will. Of course they should do. And again, as mentioned here, the US officials went through a G7 statement and removed all references that could be interpreted as being pro-Ukraine. They want a neutral stance marking the third anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion, or as the US wants to call it, a devastating war. But nothing to do with, Russia being culpable. We go on. JD Vance goes beast mode on Zelensky, trying to sabotage a Trump peace deal. Let's listen to JD Vance and see if we like what he says.
So you said yesterday, made a lot of news, bad-mouthing Trump, not a good idea for Zelensky.
Of course
what's the thought process here?
Well, look, President Zelensky, his country wouldn't exist without the generosity of the United States of America. So say thank you. And if you disagree with the president, pick up the phone and call him or call one of our great diplomats. Don't go on a media tour around Europe bad-mouthing the president of the United States. It's insulting. It's insulting.
How about your president stops insulting him? How about you stop insulting him? And how about you respect the fact that he has stood up for his country, and if it wasn't for him and those people dying on the bloody front lines, that country wouldn't exist? How about you have some decency and empathy?
Insulting to him, it's insulting to me, it's insulting to the American people, and by the way, it's stupid. All of us who know the president would tell you that bad-mouthing him in public is not the way to get...
He didn't badmouth him. Did you listen to the words he said? He said, with all due respect to President Trump and blah, blah, blah. He said, I have a lot of respect for Trump, but, the 4% thing is not true, blah, blah, blah. And he's living in an information bubble, which he is. He tried to couch out as respectfully as possible, but at the same time, how about your president doesn't lie outright about another allied leader? So I think JD Vance is a horrible human being. End of that. So JD Vance went on that big rant yesterday, which I read to you. I read that whole thing to you yesterday. Lots of people are calling it out. Liz Cheney, former Republican senator was she a senator or congresswoman? Anyway, she was on the January the 6th committee. Rarely has so much ignorance and ahistorical BS been crammed into a single tweet. I know you and Donald Trump are busy surrendering to a KGB butcher, abandoning the cause of freedom and destroying the security of America and her allies, but you would do well, JD Vance, to spend some time actually studying history. Start here with Ronald Reagan, quote, "Perhaps you and I have lived too long with this miracle to properly be appreciative. Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people. And those in world history who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again." Take that on board, JD Vance, and in the meantime, just sod off. Right, Jimmy Rushton. Moscow and Washington seem to assume Ukraine's position on the battlefield is so difficult, and I think this is true. Not that it's difficult, but actually the Moscow and Washington have misunderstood exactly how well the Ukrainians have done to degrade the Russians. So they seem to believe that the Ukraine's position on the battlefield is so difficult, Kiev would be forced to agree to any terms proposed. This is completely false. Ukraine can and will continue to fight if presented with unacceptable terms, with or without US support. I toured the front a couple of weeks ago, says Jimmy Rushton. I spoke to brigade commanders, drone units and regular soldiers. The situation was difficult for sure, but there was no sign of Ukrainian collapse, and Russian attacks had significantly slowed over the past month. A statement from Zelensky confirming that this Ukraine's position, just like I said, this is their position. Quote, "We didn't accept ultimatums in 2022, said Zelensky, when the situation was much more serious and nobody was helping us. And I have no intention of accepting any ultimatums now. However, the reality is, of course, that Ukraine are going to be pressured very much into accepting this extortion deal with the United States. Michael McFaul, the previous ambassador to Russia, said, or a former one said, Ukrainians I know were very excited about the appointments for Rubio and Walls. So Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Mike Walls, the National Security Advisor. Now they are in complete shock. So far, it appears that the action officer for Ukraine policy is Trump and no one else. And that really means we have a pro-Putin policy and nothing else. So lots of people just very clearly stating that, yeah, the US appears to have switched sides and it has a pro-Putin approach to the peace deal. Trump's special envoy, Stephen Witkoff, who's a billionaire mate of Trump with no real expertise in doing what he's been tasked to do, said he spent a lot of time with Putin during his, quote, great trip to Moscow, talking and developing a friendly relationship with him. Really? Oh, we got really chummy. Me and Poots, we're best mates. There's none of this like, I'm wary of Putin, he's a liar and he's a dictator and we need to treat him accordingly. The United States is already promising to reward Russia with economic deals. That this is official from the US State Department, an incredible surrender, said Edward Hunter Christie, of course, a few days ago after the Riyadh deals. But my point about reiterating this is it's all about the economic deals. Quote, lay the groundwork for future cooperation on matters of mutual geopolitical interest and historic economic and investment opportunities, which will emerge from a successful end to the conflict in Ukraine. As Edward Hunter Christie says, ex-ante surrender, a fake and unjust peace, unacceptable and total dishonour for the US. No mention of reparations or punishment. This is just like, oh, let's look at the economic deals that we can, the opportunities we can get out of this peace deal, says the US, demanding a peace deal so that they can extract natural resources. News is circulating that Russia has proposed a return of US companies to its energy sector, as well as its access to its Arctic deposits. This is a main topic of the negotiations in Riyadh. A Russian outlet, the Moscow Times, quotes, Russia supposes that American oil companies will come back to the country. Indeed, we have heard today. Let's let Anton Gerashenko go on. Apart from that, they are interested in joint projects with the US in the Arctic, said the head of Russia's direct investment fund, Kirill Dmitriev, ahead of negotiations in Saudi Arabia. How will China react? Will there be a response from United Europe? Do I need to repeat that Russia always lies? But we have heard today from Vladimir Putin that he wants his peeps, his representatives, to make sure Western companies come back to Russia. So actually, although he was being, we don't have an issue with sanctions, they are hurting, and he's desperate for those companies to come back. This is all about economics, and it's not about Ukraine. None of the two entities, Russia or the US, care about Ukraine's outcomes. Just how much they can make out of it. Ukraine's allies in Washington say there's a way for Zelensky to rescue his relationship with Trump, but it hinges on accepting the US proposed rare earths deal. Who knew? Axios says that the US insistence on claiming a share of Ukraine's mineral rights has been compared to a mafia shakedown by liberal critics who point out that the country would lose land and mineral rights and get little in return. It's a shit sandwich, a Trump administration official acknowledged. But Ukraine is going to have to eat it because Trump has made clear that this is no longer our problem. Trump's like, I don't really care about Ukraine. I want your minerals. You either need to eat this shit sandwich and we will not lift sanctions on Russia straight away, or we'll not do, we'll do the minimum. But if you don't do that, we're going to screw you over, and you'll be screwed over by Russia militarily and by the US kind of in the military sphere, but also economically and politically. So you're going to get it from both sides if you don't do what we want. That is extortion. No other way of looking at it. The United States is trying to extort Ukraine. Shashank Joshi is referring to, White House officials have told Ukraine to stop bad-mouthing Donald Trump, so we've heard that from JD Vance, and to sign a deal handing over half the country's mineral wealth to the US, saying a failure to do so would be unacceptable. And that was coming out yesterday. That was in The Guardian. Stop criticizing Trump and sign a $500 billion mineral deal, US official advises Kiev. Shashank Joshi says, imagine how this administration would respond to an Article 5 contingency. There is every chance it will respond in similarly predatory and exploitative fashion. In other words, if you were, Lithuania attacked by anyone, Russia obviously, but anyone, the US would go, we will come to your aid. Article 5, yeah, we'll fulfill that, but we will demand half of your GDP or whatever. It's like that appears to be where we're at. John Ridge says, I think it's fairly obvious, especially given the leaked draft, that they never intended Ukraine to sign a minerals agreement. My working thesis is that they expect, the US, Trump administration expects Ukraine to reject it so they can call Zelensky an ungrateful beggar and then cut Ukraine loose. That is just as plausible and heartbreaking a theory as them wanting them to sign it. Michael Weiss says, I've heard Ukrainians speak pretty plainly about their president, warts and all, before and during the war. But here is an anonymous Trump White House official referring to Zelensky as a theatre kid who thinks, quote, he's a character he plays on TV. Everything is a stage play or simulacrum for people who've never risked or lost anything meaningful in their lives, dripping with contempt for a man the US told to go into exile in Poland 3 years ago because his country had at most a fortnight to exist. Quote, Zelensky is a stage actor who committed a common mistake of theatre kids. He started to think he's a character he plays on TV. Yes, he has been brave and stood up to Russia, but he would be 6 feet under if it wasn't for the millions we spent, and he needs to exit stage right with all the drama. We need to get rid of Zelensky. Now, I told you about in 1987, Donald Trump came back from Moscow and took out $130,000 worth of newspaper advertising to slag off NATO, right? And I was like, what the hell was going on there? It looks like Trump is compromised. Then 2008 is another example. He received 90-something million from a Russian person who was just involved in the Riyadh talks. That Russian person paid Trump for a mansion when Trump was just about to go bankrupt. That he was paid 90-something million, which was 2.32 times the value of the property. Why would a Russian person pay over the odds for a property off Trump? Unless he wanted something from Trump. Trump is compromised by Russia, and anyone that denies it needs to deal with the data. Well, now we're seeing a claim here from Alnur Musayev. He's a former KGB head, states that in 1987, the USSR's 6th KGB department, responsible for recruiting spies and capitalist businessmen, recruited 40-year-old Donald Trump, codenamed Krasnov. In 1987, I worked in the 6th department of the KGB in USSR in Moscow. The most important area of the work of the 6th department was the acquisition of spies and sources of information from among businessmen of capitalist countries. It was in that year that our department recruited the 40-year-old businessman from the USA, Donald Trump, nicknamed Krasnov. Remember, Donald Trump went on to marry a Russian, so there you go. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in. And just to remind you that if you're wondering, really what the US administration thinks, and I've mentioned this before, but just a little bit more meat on the bone here. Jack Posobiec was someone that was sent to Kiev as part of the negotiating team and to Munich. Now, Jack Posobiec is a far-right chap who shared pro-Nazi comments, has done for years, also quoted Russian fascist Alexander Dugin, quote, Ukraine must be annexed by Russia. So one of the people negotiating with Ukraine or in the negotiating team in Kiev is someone who has said and agreed that Ukraine must be annexed by Russia. According to Posobiec, the US delegation tried and failed to convince Zelensky to sign a rare minerals deal as Trump was talking to Putin on the phone. Posobiec in Kiev right now, says Andrew Mikado of the US government on behalf of the US government, after lying and saying Ukraine placed him on a kill list for being anti-Ukraine. So he previously claimed that Ukraine was trying to assassinate him because he's so anti-Ukraine. He's one of the guys that the Trump administration sent to do negotiations. It's insane. And I absolutely love this. This is it Chris Murphy about Hegseth in charge of the Department of Defense.
Pete Hegseth got the job because he's the weekend news anchor on Fox, and Donald Trump watches a lot of Fox. And so he decided to make that guy the head of the Department of Defense and our chief negotiator in Ukraine. Pete Hegseth is screwing it up badly, but of course he is. He has no experience negotiating with anybody. All he knows how to do is read the news. So nobody should be surprised that this national security cabinet is badly mismanaging the early stages of this negotiation and are going to end up in a settlement that ultimately likely gets a lot of Americans killed in the medium and long run.
He's absolutely right. So you've got Jack Posobiec, who's anti-Ukrainian. Throw him in there as just a far-right, like, influencer bloke. Throw him into negotiations. You put Pete Hegseth, a level 4 guy, should be level 10 guy in charge of the DOD. You've got, who was a Fox News anchor. You've got Stephen Witkoff, who's a billionaire. Throw him in to talk to Putin. Putin eats him alive, and he comes out saying, we've got a great relationship. How lovely. Oh, nice poots. This is a joke. This is a bunch of jokers being put into insanely important positions because, do you know what? Trump thought it was a good idea before. Now you've got Kash Patel that's now in charge of the FBI. The United States is going to eat itself. It is eating itself. Now, interesting that Tom Tillis, as a Republican, has actually come out onto the Senate floor, specifically mentioning Trump and drawing a contrast in their positions. He's just got back from Ukraine. Here's a sensible approach from a Republican.
I support President Trump, and I believe that most of his policies on national security are right. I believe his instincts are pretty good.
Most.
But what I'm telling you, whoever believes that there is any space for Vladimir Putin in the future of a stable globe better go to Ukraine, they better go to Europe, they better invest the time to understand that this man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. And it will be a cancer that spreads into the South China Sea, into Taiwan, and metastasizes across the globe. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and a man responsible for ordering the systematic torture, kidnapping, and rape of innocent civilians, believe me, because the evidence is mile high. I support
He's absolutely right there. And more Republicans need to come out and bloody say this. And it's great to see that the New York Post, with that Ukrainian flag at the top, this is a New York tabloid pro-Trump paper, has its front page. This is a dictator. Putin's a dictator, not Zelensky, Trump. And 10 other Ukraine war truths we ignore at our peril. It's actually a British writer, Douglas Murray, who I don't like at all. But good to see that in that newspaper. Now, a few more things to get you super worried. Although this isn't too worrying, this is Trump being strong. All BRICS countries will be subject to 150% tariff for any attempt to create an alternative to the dollar, says Trump, as he's fighting back against BRICS, although he doesn't really know who's in BRICS. He thought Spain was in BRICS. So he's still going on about Canada. Trump says he'll let Canada keep its anthem if it joins the US. I like "Oh Canada," it's a beautiful thing. I think we'll have to keep it for the 51st state. He's still going on about taking Canada, I don't know, militarily, economically, I don't know, taking it somehow into the American empire. Donald Trump, moments ago in the Oval Office, Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
Canada's been very bad to us on trade, but now Canada's going to have to start paying up. And Canada's been tough on the military because they have a very low military cost. They think we're going to, protect them with our military, which is unfair. So Canada's going to be a very interesting situation because, we just don't need their product. And yet they survive off the fact that we're...
You literally do need their product, which is why you're buying it. And if you don't buy it from them, you're going to be buying it from someone else. But Canada's very close to you and it's going to be more expensive. So, again, that's a pretty naive thing to say.
95% of what they do. And Canada is just absolutely, I say it, and sometimes people smile and sometimes they say, great idea, but Canada, their taxes would come down greatly. Their security would go up greatly. Amazing things happen to Canada. And really Canada in this particular, why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when...
You don't pay $200 billion in subsidies. They're not subsidies. There's a trade deficit, you absolute dingbat.
They're not a state. You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country. So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
What an idiot. And then you've got press... I mean, she's horrible. But White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying this.
He looks forward to watching the game tonight, and we look forward to the United States beating our soon-to-be 51st state, Canada. He looks...
That's deeply irresponsible. I hope Canada bites you on the arse. I hope this position really bites you on the arse because it deserves to, because this is disgusting. It's disgusting. Then you have this position, which is deeply, deeply worrying.
Don't, Senator, you don't even, my hardest thing now is I forget to eat. You forget what time it is, and it's 6 o'clock at night, and why do I have a headache? Because I haven't eaten today. But you're going nonstop. And it's not me, it's an entire team. I've got Chad Mizell, I've got Emil, I've got Todd Blanche, thank goodness, coming in, and we've got Kash Patel now. So they better look out. Don't.
They better look out. They better look out. Here's a news flash of America. In America, we get to oppose whoever we please. If you don't like it, move to Russia. Trump's Attorney General says Americans who oppose Trump better look out because Kash Patel was just confirmed as FBI director. That is deeply worrying, but you better look out. It will be retributive. Shashank Joshi says America is quite obviously moving into in an authoritarian direction, fascist rhetoric, attack on judges, and now this, quote, President Donald Trump on Thursday again raised the prospect of serving for an unconstitutional third term. So you're term limited in the US as a president. You can't rule for 2 terms. He keeps joking about it. He's brought it up again. And at CPAC, the Conservative Conference, there were activists announcing the third term project, which is an official effort. Well, it's not official as in it's not a government project, but these guys, like official position, is their effort to end the 22nd Amendment, which gives a 2-term limit to presidents. There's no need to mince words. The GOP is authoritarian here. They want a dictator, says Joshua Eacle there. Just incredible. And
Hello there, everyone. I am Shane Trejo. I am the campaign lead for the third term project.
So you got the third term project there. There you go. You know, you had Trump calling himself a king. Long live the king. These people want him now to rule for 3 terms. He keeps joking about ruling for 3 terms. It will be something that will come about. And it will be aided probably with the new FBI director who only got in by a whisker, 51 to 49. He will be seeking retribution on all those who oppose Trump. And there will be a lot of people getting charged, going to prison maybe, who were just doing the right thing in the previous administration, following the rules. As Mehdi Hassan says, we live in an idiocracy as Elon Musk brings out a chainsaw and laughs after helping lay off thousands of civil servants, American civil servants, including healthcare workers and national security officials. And he walks around with a big chainsaw and then is interviewed and he doesn't make much sense. I think he's probably on ketamine or something. House GOP plan Trump endorsed. The House GOP plan Trump endorsed is poised to slash Medicaid. So talking about that slashing, Medicaid is looking at being slashed by 10% and SNAP by around 20% and an increase in deficits by 2.8 trillion. So they wanted to raise the debt ceiling, the Republicans, but other Republicans didn't let them because they don't like doing that. But the reason that the MAGA Republicans want to raise a debt ceiling is because they know that the tax cuts for their billionaire friends that they're going to do, and that will happen almost certainly, will increase the deficit by $2.8 trillion. And something needs to pay for that, so they're slashing. So they're giving money to the rich and taking it from the poor. Medicaid, SNAP, all these other things. So House Reconciliation Instructions changes to the 10-year deficits. Ways and Means, tax cuts. You've got Judiciary, Armed Services, Homeland, and reductions to energy and commerce, education, workforce, agriculture, oversight, and others. And then net deficit additions. Just a huge. So tax cuts are going to basically transfer into to a big deficit there. It's just an absolute shocker. Elon Musk. Oh my goodness. Right, and then it gets worse. It gets worse. So Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute, didn't he? People tried to deny it. Trump advocates ethnic cleansing. Think about Gaza. Judges have been sacked. The state is gutted. JD Vance is pushing the AFD and also the wingnut in Romania. and playing footsie with Putin. And now Steve Bannon does his own fascist salute. It's hard to deny the fascist trajectory of the US administration, says Nick Lowles.
The only way that they win is we retreat, and we're not going to retreat. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to quit. Fight, fight, fight.
So you wouldn't do that sign. He knows what he's doing. This guy knows what he's doing.
Fight, fight. Amen.
And then gives it the nod. Amen. Well, how are we here? Kampf, Kampf, Kampf. Und dann ein Hitlergruß. Sorry. Steve Bannon, after calling for Trump to be president for life. So again, 22nd Amendment, get rid of that. Third term, he can rule for life. Did a Nazi salute on stage at CPAC. Nazism has officially taken over the GOP. The few remaining conservatives have a choice. Either lead the party or obstruct it or choose to be complicit. And now we've got Elon Musk dismantling the one system he put in place to correct the community-based fact-checking correction. Dismantling Twitter's best feature, community notes, because the truth in correcting Russian propaganda is inconvenient. So because it keeps correcting him when he lies, he's going to get rid of it or change it so it's broken. This is after he spent years proudly taking ownership over the program, despite it being invented before he purchased the platform. Quote from Elon Musk: "Unfortunately, community notes is increasingly being gamed by governments and legacy media. Working to fix this, it should be utterly obvious that a Zelensky-controlled poll about his own approval is not credible." So, because he disagreed with Zelensky's approval ratings in Ukraine and thinks they should be 4%, and because he's been fact-checked about that, he's going to change community notes. Ann Applebaum says this is a new level of madness. I don't know how it can be stopped. Republicans against Trump said the editorial board of the Conservative National... This is interesting, actually. I'm going to get to that last. Sorry, this other source, Cheyenne Sadarizadeh, says Elon Musk says he's going to fix community notes because he disagrees with a note on President Trump's claim that Zelensky has a 4% approval rating. Musk also claims community notes are being gamed by governments and legacy media, but provides no evidence for that claim. The entire point of the community note system is that it's independent of the personal views of the people running this platform. If Musk starts tampering with the system because he personally dislikes some notes, then how could users continue to trust it? Well, it just becomes a dictatorship on Twitter, just as he's advocating for a dictatorship in, I don't know, anywhere, or fascism anywhere, because Elon Musk. Finally, though, good news here, though, talking about the dictator claim, the editorial board of the Conservative National, and I like to finish on a positive, the editorial board of the Conservative National Review, so this is a conservative media site, slams Donald Trump over his sweetheart deal for Moscow and his attacks against Ukraine. Quote, "Ukraine didn't fire Russian missiles at itself or direct a Russian armed column at its own capital in 2022. There's moral equivalence, and then there's a total moral inversion. You don't need to portray Ukraine as a shining city on a hill to acknowledge that it is much more committed to democracy than the rule of law than is Russia, whose malign autocratic leader Trump never thinks to call a dictator." Such a brilliant paragraph there. You don't call Putin a dictator, but you call Zelensky a dictator. There's no moral equivalence here. There's a moral inversion. You are inverting reality. Really well said by the National Review. Right, that's enough from me. Goodness me, I need a break now. Just to remind you that DZYGA'S Poor is great charity in Ukraine, based in Lviv. We've started a campaign today to raise money for 5 drones, Mavic 3T drones. We are already up to $751. That's fantastic. Really do appreciate that. Thank you to all the people who have donated. The total raised so far, you can put your name. You can either be completely anonymous or you can have part of your name on there and where you've come from. So thank you to all of those people who have so generously donated already. It's incredible. let's hit this target and get this done. That would be amazing. We do have a number of campaigns coming up, so I know it's going to be exhausting, financially exhausting. If you do have the wherewithal, it's obviously super appreciated. But if you don't, please share this around the place so that other people who might have the wherewithal can help out. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.